We so much appreciate you coming here for something that we're doing for the very first time. It's the very first Conference on Democracy session that's being held outdoors. Now, there's a reason for this. Our very special guest, Florence Williams, who many of you know through her writing, specializes in helping to inform us about our human connection to the rest of nature. Now, before we welcome Florence to the stage, we have an experiential exercise that we would like everybody to participate in. Now, for this thing to work, or to work well, we need everybody's full attention, and we need everybody's silence. Now, we know that that's asking for a lot. But I think you're going to find it interesting and worthwhile, and you will have a chance to talk about it and give us some feedback about what it was like. And the reason we're doing this is because it'll give you a taste of the flavor of Florence's work. We're going to have two people lead the exercise. One, our very own outings director and English teacher, Julie Barnes. And second, our very own MA junior, Sophie Schneider. So from here on, if you can direct your attention here toward the instructions and guidance that they're going to give you, follow them as best you can, we humbly thank you for that kind attention. Here's Julie Barnes.
So I imagine if you are like me this morning, which you may not be, that would be fine. This morning has been a little hectic, perhaps. You've been to a couple different Conference on Democracy sessions. You got up in the morning, you came here, you whizzed to school, you filled out a transportation survey or tried, and we're all sitting here ready to take in this next Conference on Democracy session. In order to, like Mark said, take in and experience some of what Florence's work is about, we're going to center and try and shed all of the craziness that may have been in your morning so that we can be present to this moment and ready to open to the natural world that surrounds us. So we're just going to take a minute to focus our attention on the present moment and whatever you may be experiencing now. So if you could join me in feeling your feet underneath you. You can put them shoulder width apart. Feel what it's like to feel the chair on your back, to feel what it's like to sit in that chair. I'm going to ring a bell just as a symbol of the starting of our attending to the quiet time, and I'll ring the bell at the end of our time of attention to the quiet. And what I'd like you to do now is just close your eyes if you're comfortable and focus on your breath when you hear the bell ring. I'll say a few words, and we're just going to have some silence, centering ourselves into this moment right now. So as you hear the bell dissipate, focus on your breath. Take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And as you exhale, allow whatever busyness that has occupied your morning to shed off of you, bringing you present to this moment. Feel your feet below you. Take in another breath and see what you hear. Maybe the cars going by, maybe the breath of the person next to you, maybe your own breath. And as you exhale, bring your attention to this moment, to what it feels like to you to be here now. Take a few more breaths, listening to the birds, feeling the air around you, seeing what it smells like here in this place, focusing on the quiet until you hear the bell ring again. Now staying in this centered and present place, I invite Sophie to the stage to open us to our next attention practice.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. We're now going to begin to engage in an open awareness of our natural surroundings to preview what our guest speaker, Florence Williams, will be discussing. So I'd like to invite you to start by actually standing up slowly out of your seats, mindful of those around you, and to the best of your ability, kind of finding your own space a little bit from everyone around you, whether that be like taking a little step to the front. So you can focus your attention on your breath as you take a breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. Notice how the air feels as it enters through your nostrils, going down your throat, filling your chest cavity, and then back out through your mouth. As you continue breathing slowly, see what the ground feels like below your feet. Maybe shift your weight back and forth from foot to foot until you find a place of center, feeling balanced and grounded. And on your next breath, explore what it feels like to roll your shoulders back. And as you exhale, just invite them to relax. Being mindful of the people and objects around you, go ahead and rotate your body clockwise so that it is facing north toward the trees on the right-hand side of the field. On your next breath in, go ahead and lift your arms and bring them to a comfortable level above your head, like you're softly reaching for the sky. Breathe here for a moment, paying attention to everything you are sensing, to what you see, to what you hear, to what you smell and taste and feel. And just take in the great expansiveness of the area around you. Now as you exhale, you can bring your arms back down to center and let them rest and maybe shake them out a little. On your next inhale, raise your arms to the sky again. But this time, focus on what it feels like to bring all that you are sensing into your being. Shift to a somewhat internal focus. Pay attention to what it feels like in your body to open yourself to your natural surroundings. Gazing up at the top of the trees, that mountain, and the texture in the sky. And as you exhale, you can bring your arms back down to center. Now rotate your body to the east, 90 degrees clockwise, facing away from Thatcher Hall. Arms still by your side. Spend this moment taking in the trees and the horizon, that little patch of blue sky just beyond the field's edge. On this next breath in, raise your arms up and spread them wide in the sky so that they are settled comfortably above your head. Breathe here for a moment, paying attention to everything you are sensing. Again, what do you see? What you're hearing? What do you smell and taste and feel? What is the closest thing you can see? Which sensations are the strongest? And what's fading into the background? As you exhale, you can bring your arms back down to center and give them a rest. And once again, on that inhale, raise your arms up to the sky. And as you sense the natural environment, see what you're feeling in your body. What physical sensations are you experiencing? What sorts of thoughts are you having? As you exhale, you can bring your arms back down to your sides. Maintaining this mindful awareness of your surroundings, including the people you are near, Go ahead and rotate your body clockwise so that it is facing south, 90 degrees, facing Mission Avenue, and casting your gaze to those trees immediately in front of you and to the sky beyond. On your next breath in, reach your arms upwards, and with a soft gaze outward, simply allow yourself to take in and truly experience any sensations that come up in this moment. Guide your attention to whatever comes up. What are you seeing? What sounds do you hear? What can you feel in your body? Can you smell or taste anything? Now on your exhale, release your arms back down and rest for a moment. Breathing in, still looking out that way. Let those arms come back up and check in with yourself. Pay attention to your body and how it feels in this moment. And as you exhale, you can bring your arms back down. Finally, rotate your body to the west, 90 degrees clockwise, facing back toward me and Thatcher Hall. And fix your gaze just above the top of the building, at the tops of the redwood and sequoia, or maybe even the palm trees up there, and the sky behind them. Breathe in and raise your arms above your head to a comfortable height. Gazing upwards, relax into an open awareness of your surroundings and natural environment. Take in the expansiveness of the sky. Pinpoint as many details as you can in the trees. And take in the entirety of the natural environment laid out before you. And with an exhale, you can bring your arms back down. They may be tired of this by now, so you can shake them out a little. And when you're ready, go ahead and inhale those arms up one more time. What sorts of things are you sensing in your body as you take in your surroundings? Let's keep these last few moments focusing inward on ourselves and how you're feeling different now than when we began this exercise. Bringing your arms and gaze back down, bring your attention back to the sensation of standing here with us, right now in this moment. Rooting yourself again in the feeling of the earth beneath your feet, take a final breath in, taking in all that you've felt and experienced, and a final exhale out, releasing anything you'd like to leave behind. Thank you all for engaging with this practice with me. Hope you enjoyed.
So what we'd like you to do now is take a second to notice the difference in how you're experiencing yourself now as compared to when you first sat down in the chair. And what I'd like you to do is turn to the person next to you, and we're going to do a short pair share. If you were in a group of 3, that's fine too. And I'd like you to share with the person next to you a noticing that you had in the created world around us or in the natural world around us. So what's something that stuck out to you? 1 or 2 things, and what do you notice about how you are different now than when you sat down? Let each person talk for about 30 seconds and then switch. When you hear the bell ring, which you may or may not hear, I'll hold it up to the microphone, you switch talkers. So one person shares for 30 seconds and then the second person shares for 30 seconds. What did you notice and how do you feel different now than when you came in? Go ahead. So go ahead and switch sharers if you haven't already. What did you notice and how are you different now? Okay. Yeah. Good job.
No, you did a good job. It
Okay.
was great.
Yeah, I think it's good.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I wonder if we could have your attention brought back here to the podium. I just have to share that one thing I felt was a tremendous honor and pride in working for a school like this, where we were able to pull off something like that. I really appreciate everybody's participation. So now, to introduce our speaker, I'd like to welcome to the podium our very own junior, Kaya Schweik.
Thank you, Sophie, for that wonderful exercise. Having just spoken at Google, our speaker today is Florence Williams. Florence lives in Washington, D.C., and has spoken at MA once before. She's a critically acclaimed freelance writer for the New York Times, the New York Times Magazine, National Geographic, the New York Review of Books, and many, many more. Florence is a fellow at the Center for Humans and Nature. She is a visiting scholar at George Washington University. She has won many awards, including the John Hershey Prize at Yale. After moving from the vast wilderness of Colorado to the bustling city of D.C., she noticed that she became unusually anxious, irritable, and depressed. Fortunately, she was then assigned by Outside Magazine to go to Japan and report on a Japanese practice called Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing. Forest bathing is a practice of sitting in nature and letting it pour into you, which offers many, many health benefits. This experience further inspired her and her new book, The Nature Fix, which you should all read. It's pretty amazing. This book focuses on the intersection of the environment, health, and science. The Wall Street Journal calls her writing droll and crisp, which she says makes her feel like a pastry. Please welcome the inspiring, nature-loving Florence Williams.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. And thank you so much to the faculty and administrators for bringing me back to Marin Academy. I was here a few years ago, and it's such a special place. I feel really honored to be part of your Democracy Day. And I have to say that I feel more relaxed giving a public speech after that nature exercise than I have felt all year. So I think I just have to bring Sophie with me on the road and get all the audiences to do this before my talks. So what we've been doing for the last 10 or so minutes is something that I hope you all noticed kind of got you into the present moment and got you a little bit out of your thinking heads. And this is something that nature can really do for us. It helps us notice the beautiful world that's close around us. And I know after I do it, I feel calmer and I feel in a slightly elevated mood. I feel a little bit better able and equipped to handle the day ahead. So I didn't figure this out for quite a long time, despite living in beautiful places in Colorado. I sort of took it for granted. I mostly thought of myself as having fun in nature. It was a playground, and it was a place where I could do my sports and be with friends and have a great time, and those are all terrific benefits. I actually grew up in the heart of New York City, and I lived close to Central Park, which was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, one of the great landscape architects of all time, who really understood not only the connection between nature and health and mood, but also actually the connection between nature and democracy, which I think is sort of interesting for your discussion today. I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but I will just mention that he understood that all people, especially those living in cities, could find in parks a place to come together from all walks of life and learn about each other and have a shared experience, which wasn't so much true, in sort of city roots before then, when society was very stratified. So in New York City, I used to roam around in Central Park. And of course, this was the days before cell phones, right? Your parents couldn't text you and say, "Where are you? And when are you coming home?" And that was actually great things. We got to explore around on our own. So I wanted to talk a little bit about being a teenager, since that's what most of you are. It's never been easy to be a teenager. It's a time of so much social and hormonal change. Your neurons are growing like crazy. Your brains are developing. You're trying to figure out who you are in terms of your dreams and your identities, what you want out of the world, and in return, what you can give the world back. And those are a lot of really big kinds of things to grapple with. Your parents understand that your brains are growing like crazy, and that's why they're constantly trying to download into you their values and their culture. And your teachers understand this about your brains, and that's why they are trying to teach you how to think. And that is an amazing skill. And when we're talking about democracy today, being able to think about that and talk articulately about it is a great thing. But I actually want to talk today about some of the dangers of thinking, because I believe in the lives we live in our modern life today, sometimes we are overthinking. And I know some of you are studying neuroscience and you're learning a little bit how the brain works. We have this part of our brain that's more newly evolved as humans. It's our frontal cortex, and it's sort of like the front of our brain and the tops of our brains. And we are so lucky as a species that we have this newer cortex. It helps us do amazing things like plan our futures and strategize and control some of our impulses. Although as teenagers, you're still working on that piece. It helps us remember important lessons from the past so that we don't make the same mistakes. And it helps us plan for the future. It helps us self-reflect. So these are amazing sort of superpowers that our brain lets us do. And it's helped us immeasurably in our struggle to survive. But I also wanted to say that we do it too much. We overthink often in our modern lives. One thing that happens to us is that we now multitask all the time. And this is further enabled by these beautiful shiny screens that we have that are so alluring and enticing. And I know as teenagers, you are multitasking all the time, and you probably think you're pretty good at it. But here's a shocking statistic for you. Studies have shown that only 90% of you are actually good at, only 2% of you. 2% of you are actually good at multitasking. And probably all of you think you're in that 2%. But 98% of you are really bad at multitasking, only you don't know it. And so what happens when you try to multitask is that you make mistakes. You lose your train of thought. You interrupt yourselves in whatever it is that you're doing. You think less deeply about things. You're less efficient in your thoughts. And actually, some science has shown that we lose 25% of our day by trying to multitask. So not very impressive. And another thing happens when we are multitasking and overusing that frontal cortex. We are actually exhausting ourselves, and we're draining our glucose and our glycogen stores in our brain. Those are the fuels in our brain that help us do all those things, but we drain them down. And when that happens, we get grumpy and we get fatigued. Another thing happens is we make cognitive mistakes. So not always so helpful. But a bigger problem that comes from overthinking is actually linked to our emotional state, and it's linked to depression. So there's a part of our brain, some people call it the worry box. It's the subgenual prefrontal cortex. It's a little part of our frontal cortex, or our worry box, and we process negative thinking in that spot. And some of you may have experienced this. I'm sure you have, if you can relate to it. Maybe you have a bad conversation with a parent, or you have a difficult conversation with a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a friend, and you process it over and over again, and you get into this sort of negative feedback loop. It happens to all of us. Some of us do it more than others. And it's called ruminating. So cows also ruminate when they chew grass because there's a part of their stomach called the rumen. and they chew and chew and chew. It's called chewing the cud, right? It goes into their rumens. We do it metaphorically. We chew the cud. We go over those negative thoughts over and over again. We know now that ruminating is linked to depression. So what is the antidote to all this thinking and overthinking? Well, I wrote the Nature Fix, so it may not surprise you that I think the answer can be found in nature. It's from being in the moment, it's from feeling, and it's from sensing, as opposed to just thinking. So there's some interesting studies that look into this, and I wanted to talk about a couple of them. Researchers at Stanford actually designed a study where they sent groups of students to walk along a very pretty city park in Palo Alto, the Stanford Dish area. It's not a wilderness by any stretch, but it has meadows and it has trees. And they sent another group to walk along El Camino Real, really busy street. And they just asked the participants afterwards. They walked for 50 minutes, so under an hour. And they asked them afterwards, did you have a lot of negative thoughts? Were you cycling negative thoughts? And they asked them some other questions. And they asked them, and how do you feel on a scale of 1 to 5? Do you feel happy? Do you feel sad? Do you feel anxious? And what they found was that the nature walkers, but not the city walkers, felt better after their walk. And they also were processing more positive feelings and fewer negative feelings. So next, the researchers wondered, well, if that's happening, can we actually see it in the brain? Are there biomarkers for these better moods? And so they scanned the brains of walkers before and after the walks. They sent them on the same walks, but this time they sent them for 90 minutes. And when they came back, it was really interesting. They scanned their brains and they found out that this worry box, I was talking about the subgenual prefrontal cortex, it actually deactivated. So there was less blood flow in the worry box, only in the nature walkers, but not in the city walkers. And the questionnaires reaffirmed all that once again, after 90 minutes, they were feeling better, they were processing fewer negative thoughts. So why is this? No one really knows the why, but there are a lot of theories about it that psychologists and environmental psychologists have posited. And they think it's that when we're out in nature and when we're out there for long enough, we start to notice the world around us because there are some pretty cool things happening. There's a bird that's loud and we hear it. There's perhaps a babbling brook that we have to cross. There's a butterfly that flitters by us. Maybe there's a beautiful sunset. There's a tree that captures our attention or the smell of a pine tree. So our senses are sort of drawn out almost unconsciously and in a gentle way. And so we slowly start to re-engage our bottom, older parts of our brain, which is our sensory brain, and we kind of deactivate our top parts of our brain, which is pretty neat. So we may intuit a lot of this, but researchers are really trying to figure out how walking in nature can be almost used as medicine. Can it be used to prevent depression? And researchers in Finland are convinced that this is the case. Finland is a country in the north. It's dark. It's got terrible weather, unlike your beautiful spot here in California. Depression rates are actually very high in Finland. So are alcoholism, suicide. So public health researchers really want to help figure this out. And after doing a lot of studies, they have now come up with a very specific recommendation for people who live in Finland. And it kind of cracks me up because it's so specific. And what they say is, look, people in Finland, you need a minimum dose of 5 hours a month of hanging out in a forest. And if you can be in the forest for a minimum of 5 hours a month, 10 hours a month is better, but if you can only do 5 hours a month, you could actually prevent mild depression. So that's kind of an amazing public health recommendation from a country in Europe. In fact, I was at a talk recently in New Hampshire, and a woman said to me, okay, I go for walks in nature, but I still can't stop thinking about my to-do list. I just go out there and I think of all the things I have to do. What do I do? And I said to her, you just have to go for longer. Because eventually your nervous system will start to shift when you're out in nature. And some of us just need more time out there than others. And some of us may also need a kind of bigger dose of more wildernessy kinds of environments than others. I feel like I really notice traffic sounds and I notice airplane sounds and it kind of annoys me. And I feel like after living in Colorado, I'm sort of spoiled, right? And maybe you're spoiled here living in Northern California. people like us may need a kind of bigger, longer dose of a more beautiful hit of nature in order to feel some of those positive effects. But it's not only emotional. There have also been some studies showing that when we can actually deactivate some of our frontal cortex, when we go back to the desk, when we go back to our homework later, we are actually much sharper. So our cognitive senses also get a reboot, as well as our emotional senses. We perform better on tests after a little walk in nature. So my advice to you, before you take your PSATs and your SATs, go for a walk around the block and look at some trees and hear some birds. And I really think you might see a difference. And you're lucky you have this beautiful school with all these grounds and fields surrounding you. So you're already way ahead of most people. Just to sort of sum up, I just wanted to share an experience actually that I had a couple of weeks ago. It's still really fresh in my mind, and I haven't spoken about it publicly at all. I was on a backpacking trip with a group of women from Atlanta, Georgia. And these were women who'd had really, really, really tough lives. They, many of them had been homeless. They had substance abuse problems, and they'd actually been involved in sex trafficking. So many of them had experienced physical abuse, sexual abuse from a very early age. They were in a year-long residential treatment program, and kind of the end of this program was this 3-day backpacking trip in Colorado. And it was a beautiful, beautiful area. We were in a wilderness area, golden aspens, babbling brooks, snow in the high peaks. I mean, gloriously beautiful, but it was also kind of a hard trip in that it was very cold. We were sleeping on the ground. And one woman said to me, she said, I feel so much more comfortable sleeping under a bridge in downtown Atlanta than I feel sleeping out here in the woods. So she was so far out of her element. And yet there were comforts provided to these women. The food was good. There were soft mattresses. The idea was that they felt safe and comfortable, but also in an environment where they were kind of forced to really feel what was going on around them. Now, what happens to people after they experience trauma, and this is true with veterans with PTSD, post-traumatic stress, and I've spent some time with these groups too in the wilderness, and with groups who've experienced trauma like these women, they tend to cut themselves off from their bodies. There's a disconnect between their brains and their bodies. And this is a survival mechanism. They've experienced so much pain that they go numb. Literally, they cannot really feel their bodies. And it was amazing to me to watch the transformation that they went through after these 3 days in the mountains, in the wilderness, where they had no choice, really, but to feel their bodies, because our bodies hurt. I mean, we were like, we were carrying heavy packs, we were walking up mountains, but we were also seeing, these amazing birds. We actually came around a corner and we saw a mother moose and a baby moose in a field. Our senses were really drawn out in this powerful, powerful and gentle and lovely way. So I wanted to share with you what one woman said to me after the trip. And she said, I never, ever really realized how much pain I went through. I always minimized it. And so I couldn't feel it until I came out of it because I had to survive. But on this trip, everything, even me losing my breath and just struggling up the hill and my knees getting swollen, all of it was part of this, It made me so aware of my body, and it just really ministered to me. And that is my final point, that nature ministers to us because it helps us return to the full, beautiful sensory organ that is our brain, and to the multiple cells and organs that make up our full, rich, and beautiful bodies. Nature knows what we need, and it helps us find it. Thank you. And now I think we're having a panel.
All right, so we've all got a couple of questions for Florence, and then we're going to open it up to you guys if there's time after that. So I want to start it off by asking, in one of your videos promoting the Nature Fix, you said that the smell of pine trees can boost the immune system. And so I want to ask, what's your opinion on artificial scents and smells? Do you think that those could work as well?
That's a good question, and I actually don't know the answer to that. But I will say that in Japan, where they are really into these hinoki cypress smells, and they distill the essential oils from the trees, and they actually put it in, they almost fetishize it. They put it in everything from soaps to shampoos to toothpaste, which I brought home from Japan. I brought home 2 tubs of toothpaste that smell like Christmas tree. And when you're brushing your teeth with this stuff, you feel like you're literally like chewing on your Christmas tree. They are convinced that it's really the essential oils that have these very complicated chemical compounds in them, like limonene and terpenes, which are related to turpentine smell. And that it's those complexes, those chemical compounds are released by trees in order to protect the trees from being attacked by insects. So they already have these kind of strong properties to fight microbes and fungi. And so it kind of makes sense that it could also help us maybe fight off bad bacteria and boost our immune systems. I do know that there are a lot of bad chemicals in artificial scented products. And this is something I wrote a lot about in my first book, where we have many artificial chemicals that mimic hormones, for example, estrogens. And these are things like phthalates, fragrance stabilizers that are put in artificial flavor products. So I would go for the essential oils myself. That's my recommendation.
We were wondering, what impact do you think that bringing technology and digital devices and phones into nature with you could have on the effects of it and just the whole round experience?
Okay, this is one I know a little bit about because I'm pals with a neuroscientist at the University of Utah, David Strayer. He's a big character in my book, and he talks about this a lot, and he's done some experiments on it. And one of the experiments, he sent groups of participants to walk around a beautiful arboretum for 40 minutes, and he had half of them make a phone call. And so their mothers were very happy those days because a lot of them called their moms. And he had the other half not use their phones at all. I think he took their phones away. And then he gave them a little quiz at the end. Part of the quiz was, how do you feel on a scale, how happy do you feel? These are standard psychological questionnaires. But he also tested them on what they noticed on the arboretum. Like, did you see this tree, or what happened around this corner? And what he found was that the people who were on their phones not only reported feeling less happy than the people who put away their phones, but they performed as poorly on those memory recognition tasks as people who never took the walk at all. So it was like they weren't even there. So his advice very, very strongly is, look, if you're going for stress reduction and if you're going to boost your mood, turn the phone off, leave it behind. Now, if you are training for a marathon and you really need to listen to that playlist and that's your goal, okay, fine. But know what you want. Know what you want to get out of your walk, and there are ways you can kind of make it work by sometimes leaving the technology behind.
Another thing we were wondering is, do different natural environments have different effects on the human body depending on the environment? So like a forest versus a desert versus a beach, that kind of stuff.
That is a great question, and I can tell you that researchers would love to know the answer to that, but they don't. One thing they do seem to acknowledge, though, is that there's a lot of individual variation. So I may feel great on the beach, but someone else may find it's way too wide open and scary. Whereas I also might feel claustrophobic in a forest and someone else would feel very comforted. And these may harken back to sort of our family experiences, our childhood experiences, our culture that we live in. So I think it would be unwise to sort of make a prescription that you should be in a forest and you should be in a desert, because I think we just all have individual preferences. So my advice in the book actually is to just know which kinds of environments make you happy. Think about it. When you're in those environments, do you really respond to sunsets? Do you really respond to water features? Or do water features kind of freak you out? And so pay attention to those and try to spend more time in the places that make you feel great.
And then our final question is kind of based on your work with the Nature Fix, what motivated you or inspired you to become a freelance writer and journalist? Oh, sorry. Okay. So kind of with your work with the Nature Fix, what motivated or inspired you to become a freelance writer and journalist?
Good question. I decided to be a freelance writer actually when I was in college, so way before the Nature Fix. But I think part of that decision was formed actually in nature. So while I was in college, I took a semester abroad and I went to Kenya in Africa, and I actually lived in a tent for 3 months during that semester without electricity. You know, we really were living at the whims of the weather and the light. When it got dark, we started to go to bed, and when it got light, we woke up. And I think I realized after growing up in New York City, I went to an Ivy League college. After living in a tent for 3 months, I realized I really liked not being so hard charging all the time. My nervous system liked paying more attention to my senses and not just being so cerebral all the time. And I had lots of time to read, which unfortunately I think a lot of us don't have time to do as much of as we'd like anymore, increasingly. And I just fell in love with good writing, and I really wanted to do that. So I do feel very lucky in that I've been able to make a career of something I love doing. And part of it is being able to engage with so many interesting people, including audiences like you. So thanks. Okay, so we're going to take some audience questions. I'm not sure how much time we have for, but someone will tell me when to stop. So if you have any questions, let me know. Yes. Okay, so the question is nature versus cities, and are the benefits because of nature itself or maybe not being in the city? And if nature becomes scarier, then aren't you just stressed out there too? Yes, absolutely. So nature can be super stressful. If you're in nature and there's a bear charging at you, or there's a huge lightning storm and you're on a mountain, you are not going to be calm. And that's fine. So when psychologists talk about using nature as a medicine, they really emphasize finding pleasant nature, pleasant and benign natural environments. Our ancestors, our deep ancestors who grew up in nature all the time and evolved in nature, certainly had many, many, many stresses. And I don't want to sort of over-romanticize life, on the veldt, right? But what they also point out is that even though there were moments of incredible stress, there were also opportunities for that stress to kind of unwind. Because after a stressful event, there was still a sunset, and there was still a group of your family and kin sitting around a fire processing what happened. And there's something about being around that fire, too, that really cements social bonds. And we know social bonds are so important for well-being, right, too. So nature provided both, like extremes of incredible stress, but also a way to recover from stress. And in our modern lives today, I would argue that we don't quite have the same ways to recover from stress that we were able to more easily access, sometimes in our deep past. So we have to figure out how to access nature and the calming effects of it, even in the city where most of us live. And that's where schools like this become so important, that have these green fields and beautiful landscaping. I just wish that more people who lived in cities could access beautiful parks, beautiful landscaping, this kind of biophilic design in cities. Where I live in Washington, D.C., only 10% of school children actually get recommended amounts of recess right? So, and I can go on and on about this. There are so many ways I think that we can enhance human connection to nature, even in a city. And I think that's actually going to be the great challenge of this 21st century. Yes.
What about the effects of isolation when you are in nature and you're not around people and things like that? I mean, some of it seems like you would say, take you away and just take you out of the whole scheme of things. It's harder to get back to that.
So the question is, what happens when you're out in nature and you're isolated away from people? I thought you were going to ask me about the effects of dogs. And interspecies connections, which is also profoundly important to us. So I think your question is that isolation helpful, or is it sometimes not helpful? And there are times in our lives when that being solo in nature can be very powerful and very meaningful, especially when we're trying to figure out who we are and self-concept. You know, humans have had for millennia and millennia these traditions of rites of passage in nature and of solo experiences. When we need to do really deep thinking about what we want to be in our lives, sometimes being alone and in a natural environment where we're not going to be distracted from daily cares can be incredibly profound. And there are other times in our lives when we need the social bonding and the social engagement. Someone pointed out to me recently, I was asking her about the value of solo adventures in nature. And she said, even when you're alone in nature, you're not really alone. You're there because you're supported by your friends and your family, and you bring them with you. And you bring their values and you bring their culture. And so you don't have to feel lonely when you're alone. And I think that's something that would be good for us to all sort of learn how to do, right? But also not be too isolated, which is a big problem of urban life, frankly. Even in cities, many of us feel isolated. Yes?
How do you feel about teachers, especially in elementary schools, who will revoke recess and outside time for kids who don't?
How do you think I feel about that? Yeah, that's a problem. The question is, how do I feel about teachers who punish students by taking away their recess and telling them they need to stay inside and finish their whatever. So really counterproductive on all levels. When I was in Finland, I visited an elementary school. Finland has some of the highest test scores in the world, so it's often held up as an example of great education. And people say, oh, Finland is so successful because their teachers are so well paid, their teachers are so well trained, the student body is really homogeneous, on and on. But what they never point out is that actually Finland has this really unique relationship to recess, which is that they send kids outside for 15 minutes of recess for every 45 minutes of instruction. And like I said, the weather's often terrible. So they have all these, they have their rubber boots by the door and their coats, and they just like run into the stuff. They run around for 15 minutes. They come back. And I said to one of the teachers, I was like, wow, that's like 5 or 6 recesses a day. How do you get anything done? And she said, well, of course we send them out to run around. If we didn't, they wouldn't be able to sit still and they wouldn't learn anything. So I think that's really the secret to the Finnish success. Okay, do we have time for a couple more? Okay, yes, right here. Okay, the question is, does going to one nature spot over and over again have the same effect as maybe going to different nature spots? I think there are a couple ways to answer that question. I go to the same nature spot all the time because I have like my favorite walk in Washington, D.C. I walk along the canal. And there's a famous saying that some philosopher or poet wrote, maybe someone here will know, but there's no such thing as the same river twice. And that is because nature is constantly changing, right? So I go to the canal every day and it is never the same. There is a different pair of birds. There are different leaves. The leaves are changing. Sometimes the leaves are down. You know, there's a snake one day and there's a frog another day and there's a great blue heron another day. So if you're being mindful in nature, which is what I hope I have encouraged you to do, you won't get bored because there's always difference. But I will also say there is something called the novelty effect, which also makes us happy and feel good. And sometimes experiencing a new environment can really heighten our sense of happiness and well-being. So there you go. There's no wrong answer. And then there was another question in the back there, the red jacket. Yeah.
My question is there a correlation between how strenuous you work outside and the benefits, or is it just kind of the same across the board?
Okay, so the question is there are there benefits to how hard you work out outside, how much exercise you get, maybe? So we know that exercise is also independently fantastic for everything about you. It's fantastic for your mental well-being. It's fantastic for your cognition. It's fantastic for your cardio, whatever. It's great psychologically. So when you can combine physical exercise and nature, you kind of get a double boost. In fact, there have been studies comparing people who run on a treadmill in a gym to people who run on a treadmill the same amount of time outside. And what they have found is that if you're actually running outside, you just get exponentially greater benefits. Not just mentally and emotionally, but even physically. For some reason, you seem to get a better workout when you're outside. And it may be because you're making sort of micro adjustments on the trail, or because your body's kind of interacting with other stimuli like breezes or, I don't know what. So yes, by all means, it's great to work out hard outside, but it's also fine just to sit on a bench outside if what you're after is a little bit of de-stressing. I think there's a spectrum, and there are benefits all along the spectrum. There are even benefits to micro doses of nature, which you can get from looking out your window at a tree. And there have been studies showing that if you look out your window at a tree for 4 seconds, you actually make fewer mistakes on these cognition tests than if you don't look out your window for 4 seconds. So there's a spectrum, there are many doses, and there are benefits at all levels of the dose. Yes, Julie.
One of the things we think about with our outings program is access to the wilderness. And you mentioned a few times how lucky or privileged we are to be on a campus that has access to nature here, and then we have a program where we get to go out. I think in the final chapter of your book, you talk a little bit about this question of democracy and access to the wilderness. Can you share a little bit your thoughts on how we can increase that access, or just what you think about that?
Great question. It's a question about access, and I think it's really also a question about social justice and social equity. You are all very privileged here, as you know, not only to be at this beautiful school, but to have this amazing outing program, which so few schools have. I wish they did. I wish my kids' schools had an outing program, and I wish the school I went to had an outing program. I think, one of the things that this book has helped me realize is that access to nature is not just a luxury. It's really a necessity for being our best human selves. And in fact, nature is critical for civilization. If we believe that it makes us better people and it makes us more community-minded, makes us better family members, it's something everyone needs. And we know that kids growing up in the inner city face very high rates of stress, chronic stress from an early age, and that in turn leads to significant health outcomes for the rest of their lives. So I'm so happy to say that there are some programs. There are some pediatricians who are really taking this on because they see that their young patients have chronic levels of diabetes, obesity, anxiety, depression. These are not diseases that medical schools have really figured out how to cure, right? And so many pediatricians, there are now a number of programs throughout the world or throughout the country, including here in Oakland at Oakland Children's Hospital. There's a wonderful pediatrician. Her name is Nushin Rosani. She's partnering with local parks in the Bay Area to bus kids and their families on a weekly basis to some of these state and regional parks. And she's seeing just wonderful things happen, not only for the kids, but for the families who also need this time in nature. And it's great family time, and it's just great time for their health. The National Park Service, the Forest Service, a number of state agencies are taking on human health as a new value that they are trying to meet. And this is really a kind of a new vocabulary for them, and they're really taking it on. There are a number of nonprofit organizations, including some here in the Bay Area. There's a group called Outdoor Afro. There's another one called Girl Trek. More and more community organizations are recognizing that kids need access to nature. I wish it were happening on a bigger scale, and I wish it were happening more. But I think there are some encouraging signs on the horizon. Okay.
Can you speak a little bit about the effects of nature therapy in prison systems and also with people struggling with PTSD?
I mentioned the veterans with PTSD a little bit going on these wilderness trips. I can talk a little bit more about that. When you have post-traumatic stress, I talked about how your body sort of dissociates a little bit from your brain. What also happens is that you get very overwhelmed by stimuli. You get what they call hypervigilant. You think, you hear a noise and you think you're back on the battlefield. And so you try to control your environment so you don't hear a lot of loud noises. If you go into a room, you sit where you can see the door. You try to avoid crowded spaces altogether. A lot of the veterans I've met are at a point where they really didn't want to leave their homes because it was so stressful to be confronted with so much stimuli that they couldn't control. They had nightmares, a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. And yet, some people have posited that the wilderness is almost the opposite of PTSD, and it draws out the opposite effects. Because when you're outside in nature, you want to open up and you want to see what's around you. Sometimes you're on a raft, right? And I went on 2 river trips with veterans. You're on a raft and there is a rapid coming up, and you have to pay attention to that rapid. Right? And then a bald eagle flies over your boat and you can't help but want to look at that bald eagle. And so it draws out these senses, in a way that makes these veterans feel kind of more alive, more vital. They start to calm down. They start to sleep better. Food starts to taste better. And these are things that happen with our nervous system kind of coming more into balance that nature can provide. The other question had to do with prisons. And there is a really neat prison project that I'm aware of in Idaho where there are solitary confinement prisoners in 2 different wings of a prison. And in the experiment, this is sort of a cleverly designed experiment. In one of the exercise rooms, they set up videos of nature, not like National Geographic videos of beautiful underwater scenes or mountains or deserts. In the other workout room, there was nothing. And they kept reports of the behavior on those 2 wings of solitary confinement. And what they found was in the workout, from the guys who were in the workout rooms with the nature videos, they saw fewer incidences of aggression, fewer fights, fewer altercations, fewer injuries to guards. So the guards actually started really appreciating having these nature videos going. So, some people argue, well, prisoners, why should they get to look at something beautiful? They should be punished. But it turns out that actually if you can provide some of these beautiful videos for them, they really behave better, they get more out of it, and everyone seems to be happier. So I'm all for nature and prisons.
I'd also like to ask, we're all pretty busy here, and I imagine there's a lot of people, maybe especially young people, that tell you they don't have time to that they can afford to spend in nature. How would you respond to them?
Well, I can relate to that. I certainly feel like I don't have time to do everything I'm supposed to do that is good for me. But I would also argue you can't afford not to spend some time in nature. If you acknowledge that being outside in nature actually will make you more efficient and a better student, and a more pleasant person for your friends and your family to hang around, pretty soon it becomes a tool to actually help you do the things that are meaningful to you. So I would suggest encouraging making a little time. Okay, yes. The question is, what about artificial nature or probably virtual reality, virtual nature? I will tell you, there are a lot of people, I was at Google yesterday, there are people who are very keen to invent a fully immersive nature environment so that you never actually have to leave your living room. I am not a huge fan of this idea. I think there are benefits that you can really only get outside. If you acknowledge that the full sensory experience is what's most helpful, you need to be able to feel the breeze on your face. You need to be able to feel the moss under your feet, the mist in your hair, the smells. Maybe someday they will be able to invent a virtual reality room that simulates all of that, but we are so far from that right now. That said, there have been studies showing that a house plant in your house or a picture of a beautiful mountain or these videos in the prisons, they do provide some benefits. They really can help you feel better. And in fact, sometimes you may have noticed if you're in the dentist chair and you're getting your cavity filled, and you're looking up and some dentists now have these like beautiful mountainscapes on the ceiling. And it does make you feel a little better. So there are benefits, but these benefits rest on a spectrum, and it's a dose spectrum. So the more real nature you can get, the better. So get outside when you can. Yes.
Curious what the reaction of the people at Google was, given that I just read an article that their revenue model and Facebook key is to keep you looking at them. And we ask our students to have devices at this school, and we do a lot of stuff on Google Documents, so
Yeah.
you have to go on your computer to do this or that. And I'm curious how your message went over with the folks who are trying to keep us looking at our phones and our computers.
Good question. The question is, how did my message go over at Google, where they're trying to keep you looking at your screens 24/7? Silicon Valley is actually, it's an interesting case because many executives in Silicon Valley will tell you they don't let their kids use screens. And they send them to these schools where they don't use screens. It's kind of like the people who make junk food. I read an article about people who make Lunchables, that junk food stuff with incredibly high rates of sodium. And one of the executives said, "Oh, well, I would never let my kid eat that." So, I think there is this acknowledgement, even at Google, that there is such a thing as a healthy diet of media. And they are very receptive to the idea that sometimes we need to unplug because they are learning the science, which says that it actually makes you more productive. You can work longer hours at Facebook if you take a break on their beautiful garden roof. So yes, unplug, go to the garden roof, and then come back and work all night. I think they're excited about the possibilities of the virtual reality, but I do think they get that there needs to be a sensible diet. I do wish that kids and all of us understood the value of unplugging a little bit more than we do, but I think we're getting there. And I know that I have two teenagers, and they say to me, but after they come back from being away from their devices for a few days, they say, "God, that was actually really nice to be away from my phone for a while." And I'm sure some of you are getting to that point too. So I think we're all just learning how to use this new technology. It's really new. One more question. Tanya. The question is about nature and creativity. It's part of the theme of this conference is art. I am not an expert in creativity, but there have been some really interesting studies showing that when we have creative insights, they often occur when we are not trying to have creative insights. They happen when we're in the shower or when we're walking the dog. I know as a writer, I often will just spontaneously compose a sentence while I'm on a trail. And I'm not trying to compose the sentence. It just comes to me. These ideas arise afresh when we allow the space for our brains to wander a little bit. And again, that's a great benefit of not just checking things off our to-do list all day long, resting that frontal cortex, which is where a lot of creativity resides. So just as your hot shower can help you do that, nature can help you do it too. Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Florence, for your talk and for your thoughts on those questions. Absolutely inspiring. Thank you. Also wanted to thank our student panel for asking your questions and helping to organize the event, for the audience for being here, and to the fellow Nature Fix organizers who are Mark, Story, Randy, and Tanya. So thanks to everyone for helping make this possible. And Mark has a final task for you all before you head on to assembly.
Yes, if you reach below your chair, you are going to find an index card and an implement to write with. And this is going to be your exit ticket. So if we can once again ask for your full attention and reflect upon what you experienced here today, both in our opening experiential exercise and what you learned from Florence. 3 questions. What did you like? What did you learn? What could be changed to make it better? So, what did you like? What did you learn? What might we do to make this session better? What did you like? What did you learn? What can we do to make this session better? When you are done, we can celebrate. Pass the cards, please, to the wings, and if some adults in the community might collect those cards for us to help collect the cards, thank you. The pens can also be passed to the edge, unless you used your own. Pens or pencils. Yeah, so both the cards and the pencils, if we could collect those. Very nice, thank you. What time do we have? So one last thank you to Florence Williams. Can we give it up, please? We also want to acknowledge Liz Gottlieb and the advanced biology class for helping to set up all these chairs, set up the sessions, pull this thing together. Don't forget.
Just ask them to make sure the pens are picked up for the field.
Oh, very good. Yeah, so please, if you see a pen that hasn't been used or an index card that hasn't been used, if you could pick that up and pass it along so that these objects are not left on the field. And our next wonderful experience will be up in the gym. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.